I am Bill Tribble. I'm a product designer and I currently work for a company called Unmind, who do mental health for the workplace stuff. I got started with design because I'm a musician and back in the zeros, I needed CD covers and flyers and so forth. So I gradually learned the basics of graphic design really slowly and badly, making flyers and stuff in Photoshop. And throughout a lot of that time, I was teaching as well. So I did bits and bobs throughout that time. I was teaching in further education colleges in London. I taught some music tech stuff, some design, and some music performance, and later some English at one point. I was doing all sorts to make ends meet. And I got some fairly steady work with a record label. Later on, I was doing all their digital marketing and graphic design stuff. They were putting out lots of singles. Like I did 2 or 3 single covers and a compilation album every couple of weeks, that kind of thing, called CR2, that record label. They do like stuff I'm not really into, but it's big, like stadium house music or something. And around that time, I was looking to like maybe get into coding deeper because I've always done a bit of that. And I thought, well, there's probably more of a career there. And I came across General Assembly back then, who had just started in London. And I checked out the coding course and decided probably wasn't for me. I went to one of their open evenings. And then that was when I kind of discovered UX. I actually I kind of invented a job for myself teaching Photoshop there. Just asked them if they wanted it and could they use it? And they said, yeah, sure. So I started doing that every few months. And whilst I was there, one of my students said, hey, you can do like graphic design. Why don't you get into UX? And I said, what the hell is UX? And that was the start of my journey in tech, really. And that was about 8 years ago. So I investigated that course and ended up taking it. And I can happily say that was probably the best kind of educational move I've ever taken. Getting into working in tech I couldn't really recommend it highly enough. So it's great to see you all here and being a part of Love Recording, because honestly, I cannot recommend it more highly. Really, working in technology has been like such a massive benefit to me and my family. Getting out of, I was working in public education, which was brilliant when I started, and it just got worse and worse over the years. Sadly, thanks to our government who defunded all that kind of stuff, and also doing like bits and bobs of graphic design and stuff. It was great in a lot of ways, but it's quite a kind of commodified role, really. And whereas I think UX design, or as it's more often called now, digital product design, is a chance to use, I don't know, I don't want to put down graphic design, because I think it's an amazing thing, and there's a lot of people out there much better at it than me. But certainly I'd say there's probably more demand for digital product design, and there's more money in it. And it's probably a more interesting job. At least it's been a more interesting job for me. And I felt that it very much it's been a really good match for my background and skill set, because what I like is people and working with people. And I also like computers. And so I kind of like, I get to be in the middle and be that interface between the technology and the people. And in that it is a people job like that, it means I don't have to spend all my time staring at computers. Although since 2020, I have, mostly because of remote work and stuff. And that's a bit of a drag, but that's just the way it's been. So to summarize then, I highly recommend this. It's great to see you all here. And next I can talk about, that's kind of how I got here. Next, I can talk about my thoughts on getting work in the industry. But I'll pause there and see, are there any questions on what I've said so far? I'm seeing a few shaking heads. All right, cool. So I'll talk next then about finding your first job. I think for me, well, there were two factors that helped me. Number one, I was already doing a lot of freelance work before I started in UX. And that helped because I knew how to work with clients, and I knew how to manage those relationships and think about that process and deal with contracts and stuff like that. So that was helpful to begin with, because I did bits and bobs of freelance stuff straight away after my course. And a visual background also really helped, because I actually went to university and did fine art many years ago. That kind of visual background was helpful, and the graphic design work that I'd done was helpful. So that's what set me up to begin with. I got work fairly easily at that time, it felt to me. And I was lucky enough, after a few little jobs and a false start in another one, I was able to find something that was a pretty good match for my first year or so. It was brilliant for the first 6 months, and then it went off a cliff and was not good for the next 6 months. And then I got out and was able to sort of get back into freelancing, basically, and I was happier doing that. So sorry, I'm going on about myself again. What I would say, first thing I want to say about finding your first job is that most of the job market is not listed out there. There's a lot of work out there, which is people thinking, oh, it would be cool if we had someone who could help with this, or I'm starting my first business, my first startup or whatever, and it's in the back of my mind a lot that we need a designer. And I just had a conversation with my co-founder about it, but that's as far as it's got, right? It hasn't made it to a listing. It hasn't even made it to a LinkedIn post. It might make it to word of mouth because people are thinking about it and they're talking about it, but it won't be out there advertised anywhere. And I can't remember the stats on this, but I did see an estimate somewhere that that's like, you know, a quarter or half the job market or something really high. Like, most of the jobs out there are not even listed yet. They might eventually get listed, but that's the first thing. So when you're getting started, it's like really important to make sure that everybody knows, that everyone around you knows that you are very public about this getting started thing, that you have a LinkedIn profile that is populated with everything that matters, that you have. When I started, actually, Twitter was really useful. Twitter's, as you probably know, in a bit of a tailspin at the moment, thanks to Elon Musk. So it might be other networks, but that was really useful to me when I got started and has remained useful. So I think getting yourself out there in any way that you can, and that is like friends and family, any kind of contacts, and just literally like talking to anybody you can about this fact that you are getting started in this career and really keen to you know, find things to do in this field is really important. That's the first thing I'd say, just because there's a lot of work out there that hasn't made it to job boards and all the rest of it. So where to get started with that? Well, it's difficult because we're still in this kind of pandemic, but no one's admitting it, state. And that means that lots of the more personal ways to network are, you know, a bit harder at the moment. But there's still things you can do, and there are still things going on. If you can get to a big city, there are going to be events in tech that you can get to and you can meet people at and say, hey, I'm getting started as a digital product designer, or I'm looking for my first role, or I'm looking for work in this area, whatever it is. And just meeting people is really worth doing any way you can. That's really critical. I'm sure you've probably heard all this before, but just put your hand up if I'm just repeating stuff you've heard. Getting out there and meeting people is absolutely critical, and not just people who might hire you, but other designers, because then when they hear about something, they'll think of you and they can link you up. And those connections really matter as well. I'd say that working in tech is probably true in any field, but it feels like it's been more true for me in this field. It's very entrepreneurial in that way, that it's kind of, for me, it's been a really long game, I guess. And the things that I've done publicly on the internet, mainly, like writing about design or things I've learned, or even in the early days, just sharing a lot of stuff on Twitter that I was reading, it's really useful. It's a long game. So if you can think ahead to like 5 years ahead, where do you want to be? What kind of work do you want to be doing? Who do you want to be doing it with? Then that you'll make that happen. You'll make that come true because of the things that you start doing now and the habits that you put in place now. So some of the recent work that I've got came to me quite directly because people knew me from, cheers, Ben Hilda. People knew me from things that I wrote and published on Medium, or, you know, what I was sharing on Twitter like 4 years ago. So people have got to know me through just being public on the internet. And this didn't come particularly easy to me. I mean, it helped that I was sort of a public figure as a musician before this. So I was kind of a bit used to putting stuff out there on the internet. But it's never, if you haven't done it much before, it takes a bit of practice, and you have to build that confidence. So you start small and you keep repeating it in little safe ways, little increments, and keep putting it out there. But the more that you can share publicly about your engagement with design, the better. Like there are no downsides to sharing your interest in design and the things you're reading and the things that you're learning and the work that you're doing, whatever it is. That's just all a benefit to share that. So be out there as much as you possibly can, and be as public as you possibly can about your learning and reading and doing, because those are the factors that differentiate you, frankly, when you are applying for work or meeting people and they look you up, they Google your name, or they find you on LinkedIn or whatever. If there's like clear, obvious evidence that you are like a highly engaged and really into this designer, you're the candidate that they'll pick over someone else who doesn't really have much out there. You know, if you've been writing blog post after blog post about the work you do, or whatever, you know, sharing visuals of your designs, whatever it is you know, we all have to find our own way of expressing this stuff. But if you have a bunch of that stuff out there on the internet that you're clearly like into this, that's like a really huge differentiating factor between you and someone else. Was that a question, Akram?
So sorry, I didn't know I was on mute.
Oh, no problem, no problem. Yeah, so that's the first thing I would say about getting hired is, well, number one, meet people. Number two, be out there yourself. And that's not always easy, but it is a process, and you've got to start now, and you've got to start with baby steps that you feel comfortable with in engaging with this stuff. Because I remember the feeling quite strongly when I was getting started with this. It was like, well, what have I got to say? Like, I know nothing about this. This is all new to me. But you can share that. you know, you can share that you feel overwhelmed by it all, but you're engaging. You can share that, you know, it's difficult to understand all these new things, but isn't this one thing you learned exciting? And that sharing anything of your learning process is really useful. And it shows engagement. When I'm reviewing people's portfolios, I haven't done it for a little while, but previous job I was hiring basically. And when I'm looking at people's stuff, if they're like, you know, if they're writing about design, if they're blogging about it or tweeting about it, or they're doing an Instagram, or maybe they're doing, who knows, a TikTok, whatever. If they're doing something, right, they're out there and they're talking, thinking, being engaged with the work, then they're just far more interesting to me than someone who just has, you know, another portfolio site. I don't know. I guess for myself, it's the stage that I'm at in my career, but I'm not really into like maintaining a portfolio anymore. I just want to, I feel like that format's a bit of a cliche, you know, the kind of case study thing where you're like, okay, this is the problem, and then this is what we did, and here's the solution. It makes sense. And especially when you're getting started, it's a good structure to put things in. But I'd like to see more than that, ideally, that if someone's doing a bit more, they're actually reflecting on it. Even maybe it is in the case study format, but they're actually saying, okay, this is what I learned. These are the mistakes that I made, and this is where it got me to, and this is what I'll do next time. Those sort of things I think are more interesting than the, like, you know, problem, interview, wireframe, prototype, result. Kind of, it's cookie cutter. And it you know, there's a reason for that format. It is kind of what we do quite often, that, you know, we quite often do research and then prototype stuff and test it, and then you get a result and you ship it and you see the, you know, that is kind of like, it's the kind of cliche of what design is. But beyond that, there are many other things that we can engage with in terms of the way that we're thinking about this stuff and learning about it. And that's actually more interesting to me if I'm hiring than, you know, 6 case studies I can't tell the difference between. So that I think I'd flag as well. And then just to add to that, the cookie cutter case study problem that I'm sure you're aware of, because if you look at any like bootcamp grads site, they all kind of look a bit the same, and everyone's got a kind of case study that. To add to that then is you can really make yourself stand out by leaning into who you are on your website and in your socials and everything else that you do online. And so the way that you do that is up to you, but it might be, I mean, I just remember, it's kind of a dumb example, but on my General Assembly course, there was one guy who, his background was in finance, but he was also into surfing. And he literally had a huge banner photo of himself riding a wave at the top of his portfolio site. And I remember like several conversations where maybe later on that I'd talked to people who had looked at all of our, because people will do this as well, that people who are hiring will look at all the people in a cohort who've just graduated from some boot camp, and they'll be like, okay, who might be a good match for me? And they all remembered him as the surfing guy. And he really stood out with that because he was the surfing guy. And you're like, you know, which one was good with that way? Oh, well, there was surfing guy. He had a thing. Do you know what I mean? And that just, it's kind of corny, right? Because it's almost irrelevant to design, but showing who you are and what you are and the things that make you, they're actually like really important to getting work. And also I think it's partly what it is what makes you successful in the work, right? Your particular background, it's not just about the design skills that you're learning on this course. It's everything else that you've learned in life. And that'll be working with people, that'll be teamwork, it'll be communication, it'll be all the things that we lamely call soft skills, you know, the actual people skills that you've built up. And you know, your humility and your willingness to learn, and your ability to listen, and your ability to be forthright and put opinions out there. All these other human factors are actually what make you A, hireable, and B, successful in your work. It's a bit like, you know, what you learn on a boot camp is, if you imagine, you know, if you've ever played like a role-playing game and you have a character sheet and it has a list of skills, you add a few skills. You add prototyping, you add wireframing, whatever, but you're just adding skills to a big old list that you've already built up in your life, right? And it's the whole picture of all those skills that you've built in your life that actually make you useful and effective in the work that you do. The prototyping and the design, you know, it's easy to sort of feel like they're the whole thing, but they're not. They are part of the reason why people hire you, because they need that stuff done. They need prototyping, they need testing, etc. But the bigger picture of why you get hired is because you're you, and you as a human being are a useful teammate and a useful thinker and useful communicator and all the rest of it. And that's what makes you useful to a company, and that's why they pay you. So I'm going to stop ranting there and give you all a chance to ask some questions.
Feel free to take yourself off mute or to put it in chat.
Hey, Bill. Thanks for that
Hey.
talk. It was really, really informative and really helpful. I guess in the current climate of the job market, where a lot of jobs are kind of looking for people with experience over its 2 or 3 years, what would you say as a senior product manager would want you to take a risk on someone who's a junior just coming out of a boot camp? Obviously, you talked about, you know, doing stuff like maybe tweeting or doing blogs. But in terms of like applying or trying to make yourself known, what would be something that would make you think, you know, I want to take a risk on this person, even if they don't have any prior experience?
That is, it's a really tricky one. I think there's two main types of company who can do it, and they tend to be like really early stage startups or really big companies, and that they both do it in a very different way. The really early stage startup doesn't have a freaking clue about design. They have no idea really what you do or anything, but they've got a rough idea that they need design, and they will go, yeah, sure, why not? You know, it's much cheaper to hire you, and you're going to be like, you know, you're kind of preppy and like excited and going for it. And so startups do that. And then the other sort is the big companies that have trainee type schemes like the BBC and the rest of it. And they are open to hiring bootcamp grads sometimes because they have a structure in place and they know that they can basically train you and make you useful to the company. So those are the two scenarios. And I think they're both kind of a bit different in that kind of risk taking that you mentioned. The startup, like a lot of it is just going to be meeting people, I think, a lot of the time. And I know that's tricky, but it is really just getting out and finding places where startup people congregate. And it might be like founder meetups, it might be developer meetups. There's like lots of places where you can go that aren't necessarily design meetups, but they're places where tech people go. And they're a really good chance to actually meet people and talk to them and, you know, meet their friends, hopefully, and build those connections, which will get you that startup work. The other stuff tends to be much more formal, because if you're going to get a job at the BBC or whatever, you kind of got to go through their channels. What you can do is just contact people directly on LinkedIn. In addition, you're going to have to like probably apply for those sort of jobs through their channels, but you can also just ask people, contact people on LinkedIn and say, hey, you know, well, ask some questions about the job, the role, what they're looking for, all those kind of things, and stand out in a way that that shows that you're really driven and engaged, basically. You like being there, and not just another like name in their list, but actually a face on LinkedIn that's asking something about the job, or maybe you talk to people who've recently gotten into that kind of role as well, and ask them how it's going and if they'd recommend the place to work. And you know, anything that you can do just to kind of build some sort of bridge, build a personal connection to those companies is going to help you stand out, basically. Because you know, even if there's someone like who's maybe like a year ahead of you, who you managed to build a relationship with, they might mention you to their boss when they're looking at that list of people who might join the trainee course, for instance. So that can certainly help.
Yeah, no, that one makes sense. Thank you.
What other questions do you have, Victoria, Renelvi?
Yeah, so yeah,
I can hear you okay.
so I wanted to say that what you said about like showing your work and stuff was really like resonating with me, because I'm actually reading that book, Show Your Work.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, definitely going to take that on board and like start posting on LinkedIn and stuff, because I always thought as well, like I'm not really an expert and I don't really know what to post and like all this kind of stuff, but I think it's important to just kind of like show your journey. So I thought that was really good. And my question is basically, like I'm in a situation where like I have been doing like some like UX kind of stuff where I work now. Like I'm in marketing, so I've been like utilizing like my skills and stuff. But it's kind of been difficult to kind of like navigate that alone as a junior designer, because like I haven't been working with any like senior designers, so I'm not sure if my processes are good, and like,
Yeah,
I'm not sure what I'm doing is like, I don't know, like the normal kind of thing that you do as in a junior UX role. So I was just wondering, like, how would you manage like your junior UX designer if you were like managing one? Like, what would be the kind of thing that you would do to help their learning and like, guidance and stuff like that?
yeah, tricky question. I mean, I think for me, like if I'm working with someone who's got less experience than me, I try and help them get better at what they're doing by asking them lots of questions, generally, in like, so, you know, why have you done that? And what problem are you trying to solve here? And yeah, stuff like that. It is a tricky one, because I mean, the context I've worked in like that, I guess I haven't necessarily worked with that many people who are really keen to get better at UX type stuff. My biggest problem has been working with designers who didn't know what they didn't know. I guess so like maybe they're very good at like interface design, for instance. This is like a really common problem, and so they make like very pretty screens that don't really solve the user problem. For instance, I was working several years ago in Japan with a designer who'd made all these very pretty iOS style screens with lots of thin lines and thin text and faded gray and stuff. But she hadn't like realized that we were going to be shipping first in India, where most people are on an Android phone with like 300 pixel resolution. And none of those designs were going to work. So we basically then had to like redo them all in a way that was going to work on a low resolution Android screen. So it was like she just hadn't really sort of thought ahead there. And I came in late to the project. I was like, okay, so we're going to have to redo all of that. Yeah, it's a really tricky one. I mean, I think you've got to do the work. You've got to kind of do as much of it as you can yourself and review it with someone else as much as possible. So if you can reach out to people, find a mentor would be really useful. There are like formal ways that you can do that. I think there might be through Love Circular, and there's certainly the UX Professionals Association is fairly cheap to join. I think it might be 20 quid a year or something. You can find someone who'll mentor you for free through UXPA, if you look that up. And again, like, you can go out and meet people in person and ask them lots of questions and see if they would be happy to review some of your work sometime and give you advice, and that kind of thing could be really helpful. There we go, Jenny.
Okay, thank you so much.
Cool. Because I think with design, it's much more like you build the confidence through doing it. And now I don't really think about, what stage of the design process I'm in or whatever. I'm just trying to answer a question, and I know there are various tools that will help me do that. And that's so it gets much more like a kind of language that you speak than like something you've got to remember and look up and all the rest of it. And that's where you'll get to with practice. It's like playing an instrument or something.
Thank you.
When LV, was there something you wanted to ask? No.
Not right now.
I'll ask a question then, Bill, whilst others are thinking of questions. If you have 10 CVs and portfolios in front of you, what grabs you to make the 5 that you would then interview?
That is a great question. And it actually leads me on to a topic I was thinking about earlier but haven't really mentioned yet, which is the real work thing. So it's very difficult to assess student work, basically. When you see people have portfolios or maybe even things in their CV that are concept pieces of like, hey, I redesigned Airbnb's app or whatever it is. It's like, it's really important for you to do it. I get that. Like, you've got to do that work, and it's good to build the case studies because it's good practice and you get it out there and so forth. But the most important thing that I'm looking for if I'm hiring is anything real, like anything with other people involved who actually have time and money on the line. So concept pieces are good practice and worth doing. But to differentiate yourself, that's the absolute key thing, is having something in there that is real in any way. It doesn't have to, you don't necessarily have to have been paid to do that work, but it was with someone who, you were actually working with a client, like someone else who's really trying to get something done, be it an app or a website or whatever, and you helped them do it. And you worked in that relationship to improve things for somebody else. That's the absolute most key thing that differentiates people. So if I get 10, I'm just going to say portfolios, I'll get back to CVs. If I get 10 portfolios and one of them has done real work with a startup, that's the one that I'll look at the most, because I'll know that at least they have some grounding in like the real life of a designer. And it's not just concepts, because anyone can kind of do concepts. It's like, I hate to say it, but there are many boot camps out there. There are many people who get into them and they do the student work, they do the concept pieces and they put them online. And you'll see them moaning about this on LinkedIn or whatever. There'll be some recruiter every few months, there's some recruiter that says, boot camps, waste of time, nonsense. Everyone, they're all rubbish. There'll be like a lot of that out there. Don't let it affect you because it's nonsense. Boot camps are amazing. I'm a product of a boot camp. It transformed my life. Fundamentally, I'm not exaggerating when I say that. And it gave me a foundation on which to learn this profession. That's all it really can do. They're pretty short generally. The one I did was 12 weeks or something. It can give you a foundation. I used to talk about scaffolding as well, perhaps a foundation and some scaffolding into which you can build like a real designer. Because it's so short. You're just kind of getting all these concepts thrown at you and you're trying to do all this stuff, and you get through it and you've got these kind of fairly cookie cutter case study sort of things. So the one thing that can really differentiate you is any kind of real work. And it could be like, it could be almost anything. It could be the hardware shop down the road. It could be your friend's startup. It could be someone you've never met at some SaaS product that you offered your assistance with, or some product. Maybe there's some app you've got on your phone now that isn't really all that much good, and you can see ways to improve it. And you talk to the developer, and you just email them and say, hey, I'd like to help. Can I design mock-ups and screens? Even if it's that, right? And maybe they never even use it, but you did a thing for a real product and you really spoke to them about it, and it wasn't just a concept piece, then that is more valuable than any concept piece. That's all I can say on that. When it comes to CVs, okay, I mean, this is just truth for any CV. Number one, like, spell check the damn thing. I can't, like, honestly, it's such a bad look. If people have typos anywhere in a CV, on their LinkedIn, like anywhere, it is instantly a massive turn off for me. I don't know if it's just my brain, the way it works, but it's like, okay, a lot of design is checking details. It's not the be all and end all, and quite often I'm happy to not do that work if I can, and let someone else handle the interface details or whatever, and I'll just do the big picture thinking because that's what I like doing. But it's really essential to be able to get all the details and spot the pixel that's out of line, or the thing that's the wrong color, or do you know what I mean? Like these little things. And text is a really big part of that. If there's a typo in the app, oh my God, it's a bad look. It's terrible. It might even like lose a company millions of dollars. You know what I mean? If there's some, like, no one understands the button because there's a typo in it, whatever, it can completely demolish things. So it's really critical to pay a lot of attention to the details of copy and other design things. So the first thing I'm looking at, if there's any kind of typos anywhere in anyone's work, I'm just instantly like, oh no, this is terrible. Second thing I'm looking at is your ability to write. And like quite often there'll be people, I have a little block on my CV. I haven't looked at it in years now, but a little block of text at the top that says who I am, what I do. And I think that's a really useful thing to do on a CV. Just to say, just tell me something about you. What are your ambitions? What you're looking for in your next role? So anything like that. It's kind of a cover letter-y sort of thing, but it's really short. I think that's a really useful thing to do. If you're adding a cover letter to application as well, it's really important to make sure that's as good as it can be. So write it, get a friend to check it. If you've got a mentor, you can ask Jenny or whatever it is. Have someone else look at it and improve it, get it as good as it can be. Writing is, honestly, it's a superpower in design. When we think design, we often think of pictures and grids and layouts and stuff, but writing is incredibly important. There's a designer I like quite a lot. You might want to look him up. He's quite a funny talker as well, and he writes good books. He's called Mike Monteiro. And he said that design, as a designer, you're a communication professional. Because what we do is communicate, and we help others communicate things. And we do that in lots of different ways. We do it visually, and we do it with text, and we do it by speaking. So as a designer, you're a communication professional. You better get good at it. The internet is like 90% text, and most apps are at least like, if you think about what actually goes on in them, it's at least like, you know, 3/4 text. So text and writing are really critical. And I look for good writing, and I look for thinking. Beyond that, we've got a CV. It's clear, it's legible. They haven't used a wacky typeface. They haven't tried to pack too much in there. And there's some sort of, there's a clear, like, ideally there's a clear history of like that progression into this, but they're not like necessarily hiding. Maybe they, you know, maybe they worked in fast food, or maybe they worked in a supermarket or some sort of service industry. You don't need to hide that stuff, but you can lean into the strengths of what you learned there. Say, for instance, you worked in a call center, or you worked, you know, in a hotel reception. You can talk about the communication skills that you built there. And say you did some kind of freelance work in the past, you can talk about your ability to work with a client. So whatever you've done in your past, like lean into the strengths of that, relate them to design and where you want to go, and make it look as good as you can. And finally, like, once I've scanned that stuff, it's just basically like layout. You know, have you laid out a page? Can you communicate effectively in this sort of the basic graphic design of a 1 or 2 sheet PDF, you know, an A4 sheet or 2? Is it like just basically like legible? And the last thing I want to say is, I personally, I know not everyone has this, but I have a bit of a pet hate with those like skills chart things people put on there. I think like a list of skills is okay, but trying to like, I understand the temptation, but trying to kind of quantify like how good you are at these different things, I don't think it's really particularly useful. It just kind of, you know, when there's some sliders, like, you know, I'm more prototyping, I'm more user research, whatever it is. I don't think it's that useful, because it's so subjective to you for a start. there's no like set scale that we can judge someone's ability in Figma or user research, right? You could like, just, if you want to put skills on there, then make just a list and prioritize them. Like, you know, these are my design skills in this order of priority or preference or whatever it is. You know, if there's something you don't like doing, put it at the bottom of the list. But yeah, no need for graphs or charts for your skills. Just give me a list. It's like, yeah, you can't just quantify that easily.
I'm so pleased you said that, Bill. I also hate the sliding charts of skills and things. I say exactly the same as you, so I'm very pleased that you've backed me up on that. Brilliant insight that you shared with us. Thank you on that. Who else has got a question for Bill? Take yourself off mute or put it in chat.
I have another question. How would you go about like talking to like networking, reaching out to people on LinkedIn, stuff like that?
Yeah.
Well, the first thing I would say is that I would try and think of it less as networking and more of making new friends who work in design, because you know, I've totally fallen for this in the past, that, you know, you go to the meetup and you meet lots of people. It's all very exciting, and like, you know, maybe you do a lot of swapping of business cards or whatever. I don't, man, it's been a while since I've been to a meetup, but yeah, people do that, and it can get all a bit transactional. So that's the first thing I would say, is just that it doesn't need to be like that. You can be yourself. You can make new friends who work in tech and ask lots of questions, and, you know, learn stuff and show you're interested. That would be my approach. And I think that's still what I try to do. If I go out, I want to meet people and I mean, it sounds really corny, doesn't it? But yeah, it's great to make new friends, and it's great to make new connections. And it's the real like human side of it that counts. It's not the fact that that person might help you get hired at some point, although they might. It's the human side that matters. Because if you go to these things and you do that kind of like networky, plucking cards kind of, it's just, it doesn't feel good. You know, no one feels good. And if you don't feel good about something, then you don't even pursue those connections. It just feels like this sort of meaningless transactional thing. So I really emphasize that it's about, you know, the humanity of it and the friendships and us like basically being people who work in the same sort of sector. That's all there really is to it. And it's the human friendships and relationships that matter. The fact that we all work in tech is a secondary thing. And it's, you know, can be incredibly useful to have lots of friends who work in tech if you want to work in tech. But it's the friendships that matter first, and the people that come first. That's what I would say, because I think I kind of went into it with a bit more of like a business mindset initially at times, and it's almost like the way these events promote it, because they'll be like, okay, so there's a networking section here for half an hour, and everyone gets to like, you know, sip a beer and, oh, hi, nice to meet you, and then back to the talks or whatever. And it's, do you know what I mean? Like the whole sort of structure of it is kind of corny like that, but actually, like, I think just being human and being real and building real friendships is absolutely the most important thing. It's unfortunate that there's these like awkward slots in these sort of business oriented events to do stuff like that, but you got to work with what you've got and try and build real, you know, connections there, because nothing else really matters in life and work.
Thank you. Yeah, I understand what you mean, definitely. Yeah. And I definitely feel like that sometimes. That it's good that we kind of feel like it's more about like the connection and not like transaction. So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's really awkward. I know when you're getting started in this industry, I definitely felt that it was very like, I was very needy, I think, to begin with. You know, I needed to make connections, was how it felt, and I needed to find people, and I needed to like find work and all that stuff. And all of that is true and was true, but I think it's important to put it aside when you're dealing with human beings and try, you know, like, because otherwise, yeah, you can put that in your LinkedIn post when you're announcing that you're looking for work or whatever, right? It is transactional, essentially. Like it's you know, part of this sort of computerized network thing, and you're like, I need to find a job, and someone's going to pay me to do this work, and I'm good at this work. But when it's real life and you're actually meeting people in a real room and all the rest of it, you kind of got to put that aside in a way and just be as real as you can. And you can announce it, you know, in a conversation and be like, oh, hi, you know, I'm Victoria, and I'm looking for my first role in UX, and this is what I've done. But like, you know, that's just the start of the conversation, right? And they might not be able to help you with that now, but they might remember you in 3 years as well. That's the thing, that it's a long game, all this stuff. And the connections that I've made in the industry over the years and the friends that I've made, although they are people that I'll quite often only see at industry events, they're not necessarily my neighbor or someone who I've got connections with for other reasons, but I still value them as friends, and I value those connections and the things that I learn from those people, sometimes online, sometimes when I get to meet them in real life.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
We've probably got time for one more question. I'm aware that some of you might be at work. Del, Ramisha, Lily, anybody want to put anything in chat? Ask a question in chat. Bill, whilst we're waiting for a final question, do you want to share about the session that you're running in a couple of weeks' time? A really exciting session for us on ethics in design.
Yeah, sure. This is something that is very important to me, working in design. sometimes we get the opportunity to help companies make the right decision when it comes to the people that they are serving. And that's the kind of thing I want to talk about. Some of the recent failings of the industry, as I see it, in not serving the users of their apps, but rather serving other interests like governments or advertisers or whatever. So I think that it's important to think about what you're doing as a designer and the ethical side of it, and that you can make a difference. Christian, you've got a question.
Yes, sorry to interrupt. I guess it was just about, what was it like working in the music industry? I think you said you were a musician, so I guess what's it like working in an industry where you're, quite passionate about it, and it's obviously not the music side, but the design side of it, because I'm a big fan of music as well. And hopefully I would love to end up in the music industry someday. So it's kind of like an insight into what that was like, the ups and the downs, and how you kind of balance your passion with work.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it's been an interesting one for me getting into working in tech, because on the one hand, all the problems are human problems, right? And so they are all interesting in their own way. Like, I've worked on so many different things, from like, shipping stuff, like people booking time on like oil tankers and stuff, through to the solar power interface I was actually out in Rwanda at the start of 2020, user testing with farmers, like off the grid with their solar power interface. So I've worked in so many different things, but one thing I do find is that if I've got a particular interest in an area, it is 10 times easier for me to really get into it and do my best work. So I've worked on a few music related things in tech, and I've absolutely loved it. It's been brilliant fun. And right now, the thing that I'm working on in wellness is also really important to me. Mental health and wellness is another area that I'm really passionate about. So I feel really fortunate to be working on something that I care about, and it helps me really get up in the morning and do good work on it. Basically, it's much harder for me to get excited about, even like a banking app or something. For me personally, I just don't get that motivated by it. So especially a few years ago, I worked on an app that was literally for accountants to help their clients, and I was just so like, oh God. It was really hard to get motivated about it. I was dragging myself into the office. So I would just add that the music industry itself is a bloody hard way to make any sort of money. The tech industry has been a far, far better place for me than that. It's a bit of a kind of winner takes all industry, and there's not much of the all there either. The music industry, you've got your Beyoncés and your Jay-Z's, and then you've got a million people who barely like cover their costs. That was basically my experience. I never made barely any money doing music things, or even like graphic design for music things. It was better than just being a musician, but not a lot. So there is a bit out there. I mean, there are some bigger companies now that you can work for, that, like, say, Spotify or, I don't know, Apple or whatever, that are doing music related things, or Dice here in London. So, and those can be like really cool things to work on, I guess. Did I answer the question? Is there something more specific you want to get into there?
No, it was really just more about your experience and, the takeaways that you got from it, the ups and the downs. But
yeah. Cool. I guess we're about at time.
Yeah,
folks.
thank you. Thank you so much, Bill. We look forward to having you with us again on Monday, the 12th of December at 12:30. For students that have joined me today, so we can improve community learning, I'm going to post in the live Slack channel my main takeaway is, and if you could share your top main takeaway of Bill's session today for other students to learn from, and then they can listen back to the recording as well. Thank you so much, Bill. Thank you so much, everybody, and enjoy your afternoon.
Thank
Brilliant.
you, Phil. Take care.
Bye-bye all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Cheers.